Hello, fellow language learners. My name is Jacob, and I'm here to talk to you about the languages that I'm learning and have learned and I'm fluent in and not fluent in. And I get this question a lot. It's the question every polyglot hates to answer. Not because we don't like talking about languages, because honestly, if you hang around any of us, you would know we love talking about languages. The problem with it is, not only is there such a long list, but also many people are ignorant about the fact that fluency is a really hard to define concept. So I'm here to talk about all my languages, how I learned them, and whatnot. So it might be a pretty long video, but stick around and you'll be able to see what I'm learning. Anyway, first and most obvious is the language I'm speaking in currently. It's English. English was my native language. So typically I wouldn't give much of an introduction, but for you guys, I'm going to let you know that English actually was my native language, but I was born with fetal alcohol syndrome, and I was adopted, so I didn't really learn to speak English until I was like five-ish, like fluency, like with a native fluency. So now my English is obviously native, but it was pretty interesting that I actually didn't have language skills until I was well into learning English, and I've already started learning Latin, to be honest, too. So then afterwards, my next language, I started with Latin when I was really little. Started with classical Latin, and it was in like I was homeschooled, so we had a homeschool co-op we went to, and they taught Latin, which they saw as the base of all languages, which is kind of true. But I learned Latin. It helps me learn a lot more languages. I hated it back then, love it now. Led me into ancient Latin, which I learned as well. Both classical Latin and ancient Latin, I would say I'm at a B1 fluency, so not the greatest, but I mean, I learned it so young, I'm almost a native. Anyway, German was the next language that I learned. Ki- Yeah, so German, when I was 13 or 14, I was still homeschooled and I entered a German class at a homeschool co-op, and we met in the library. We like reserved one of their rooms in the library, and we would meet every week, learn about German. Sometimes we'd go on a field trip to German Village, Ohio. Other times we would like have a meal at the German teacher's house where we're only allowed to speak German, eat German foods, and eat the German way with your fork and your uh, left hand and your knife. No, it's the opposite of the American way. I forget because I do both. Anyway, so I learned German. I would say I'm at a C1 fluency in German. Currently, my grammar is not the greatest, and I actually speak it way better than I can write it, which is kind of weird. But anyway, the next language I studied, I consider to be Swiss German. Swiss German, I didn't really actually study for that long at all, but I studied it nonetheless. And one of the biggest ways that I studied it was I would watch Swiss German broadcasts or listen to and watch Swiss German broadcasts. There's this show in German, it's called Eins gegen 100. In English, it's called One versus 100. And it's mainly when it's in English, it's mainly British English. And it's basically a trivia game where they teach you, or they like ask you trivia and you have to answer it. And then there's an audience of 100 people and they're also answering it. So the first one's usually pretty easy. You get the question right. And then like 13 people will get the question wrong so that like you have only 87 more people you have to stump with the questions. So it's a pretty cool show. And in Swiss German, it really let me see what it was like. The host usually spoke Swiss German, and the contestants most of the time spoke Hochdeutsch, but sometimes the contestants also spoke Schweizerdeutsch, so that was pretty cool. Anyway, the next language I was learned was American Sign Language. American Sign Language, or ASL, is a really cool language. I would suggest anybody learn it because if you come up with a deaf person in like a store or something, you will know what to do or say. Anyway, I studied Swiss or American Sign Language with my beautiful girlfriend, Miara, and we spent like 48 hours total of study on like 4 different days, going through a dictionary and practicing it with each other. We still talk with each other in American Sign Language, which is really cool. So, a funny story about American Sign Language is after I had become fluent, I was with a friend of mine in the mall and we were shopping, and this guy comes up to us with a card and it says, I'm deaf. Here's like a card you can donate money to me to help me with college. Here's like some finger spelling signs you can use to talk with me. And the person I was with and me both knew American Sign Language, but we like couldn't we just blanked out because we never actually had to use it with a deaf person in real life. So we're just like yeah, ASL, yeah, yeah. So we were stupid, but yeah, it happened. Anyway, the next language on my list of languages is Dutch. Dutch was a language that I started studying for a few reasons. The first reason is that it was really close to German and really close to English. So reading it, I could actually read it fine. Like, obviously, I couldn't write it because I didn't know their particular vocabulary, but with reading it, I could read it. Pronouncing it was terrible for me because they have some pretty weird letters compared to the English or the German. But the Dutch was really interesting to me, so I started to learn it. Another reason why I learned it was I have a friend who goes to the school I go to, but also went to my church back home, and we've been friends for almost a decade. And her dad's from the Netherlands, and all her grandparents on her dad's side speak Dutch. So when I heard them talking, I'm like, wait, that sounds familiar, but not familiar enough for me to understand what they're saying. I want to learn this language. Anyway, now I would say my Dutch is at like a B1 or B2 fluency. I can use it in conversation, but I can't really talk about abstract thought at all. Anyway, next language I learned was Czech. And Czech is a really interesting language because I had already started and stopped learning Russian, but all the Slavic languages are very similar to each other. Czech was like Russian, but I didn't have to learn a new alphabet. So, uh, like even words, like in Russian, the word for good is dobre, and Czech, the word for good is dobry. Like it's that similar, just with Latin alphabet versus the Cyrillic alphabet. So I learned Czech through Duolingo. I learned Czech by writing out Czech grammar books, and I also listened to Czech broadcasts. And yeah, and then French was the next language that I have on my list. I didn't really study. I studied French passively. It was more of a hobby at that point. I used Duolingo. I had a notebook where I would write out little paragraphs and French, like, not that I was understanding what I'm saying. I was like, just try and write out different paragraphs that I found on the web as like to get a feel for the language, but I never started afterwards. And then after, and so French was like a A2-ish fluency. After French on my list is Japanese. Japanese was a real workout for my brain. That was fun. Um, I could say that my hiragana skills are pretty well versed. I could tell you what a word written in hiragana is pronounced like, but probably not what it means. I know a few phrases in Japanese and then characters, but I don't actually know how to speak the language, so I wouldn't even give myself an A1 fluency in Japanese. Yeah. After Japanese is Russian, which was really fun for me because I started learning Russian 2 years before I was even interested in learning several languages. And I stopped it 2 weeks later, and I picked it up after I started learning, what was it? After I started learning Dutch, I also picked up Russian again. Tried to learn them simultaneously, but the alphabet wasn't working for me. So I stopped again. And then um, when I came to the school I go to, there was one person who was a friend of mine who spoke Russian or was learning Russian but spoke it as like an intermediate level. And then there was another person who was a native Ukrainian who spoke Russian and Ukrainian as well as a few other languages. And so I started learning phrases and sentences, and I can actually form thought in Russian now. So that's nowhere where it can be, but like would I can speak Russian, I would say. And then I started learning Hebrew only out of, and Biblical Hebrew only out of kind of like an obligation, but also a very interested personality with it. Because I go to a Bible institute, I wanted to learn the Hebrew scriptures and how to read them, but I underestimated the task of learning a non-European grammar system because the Hebrew language isn't set up like English where we can have like a root word and maybe we have a prefix here, a suffix here, and to flip them around like it means simple stuff. In Hebrew, you have like your three letters which you can apply a root to, and it's a different flavor if the root's over here or if you change the root and it's like this. It's like a lot different than a prefix, suffix, chunk system where you can just throw them around. And so, and that's also the same with Arabic. So I haven't even started learning Arabic, even though like that's an obligation for every polyglot. So Hebrew's on pause, kind of. I'm learning the writing system because that's important to me. But other than that, going, I'm like pausing it until I can get a grasp of other languages that have similar grammar, like Irish Gaelic. And then the next on my list is Irish Gaelic, which is funny. Um, I started learning Irish Gaelic because I had a roommate last year who spoke as a native language French and Spanish, kind of. And then he also spoke a native Panamanian language, Italian, Catalan, and English. And then he's like, we both love languages, so together, why don't we learn a language? And so we chose Irish Gaelic. And I actually ended up studying it a lot more than he did, which was kind of lame. But um, yeah, I haven't finished the Duolingo course yet, but I do listen to broadcasts, and I'm on several Irish Gaelic learning servers on Discord. And then the next language on my list is Esperanto, which is really interesting. I've never officially or formally studied Esperanto, but because of my grasp on languages and the fact that Esperanto is similar to several families of European languages, I can read Esperanto, and because I've looked at grammars and dictionaries very briefly in Esperanto, I can probably speak it to introduce myself, like mi parolas Esperanton and stuff like that. But I would not say I'm at anywhere fluent, probably like an A1, but it seems like a really easy language, so it's definitely on my list. Low German or Low Saxon or Plattdeutsch, however you want to call it, is the next language on my list. I started learning it. Okay, so I've always wanted to learn this language because it's one of the languages that German dialects come from. But the problem is not many resources for Plattdeutsch exist. So I kind of just was like, oh, I'm probably never going to be able to learn this language anyway. And then I found a Jehovah's Witness language learning app, which I don't believe in anything the Witnesses believe in. Let's just put that out there first of all. But the language learning app that they had Plattdeutsch, which is really, first of all, weird, but second of all, it was really helpful to me. So the way their app was set up, you could like download a course of like greetings and stuff. So I only downloaded courses that didn't have any religious content, which I think is kind of cheating them out of the purpose of their app. But um, I started learning Plattdeutsch, and I don't think I could call myself even A1 fluent in Plattdeutsch right now. But I think it's really cool. Anyway, Italian is next. Italian's a really fun language to learn, especially because of my interest in Germanic and Romance languages. And Italian was really similar to Latin, so I could probably already read it at the time, but I've been learning it for a while. I'd say I'm probably A2 fluent because I have been pretty passive with it. But yeah, the next language on my list is funny. It's High Valyrian, and for those of you who watch Game of Thrones, you know what this is. Those of you who don't, you don't. I don't actually watch Game of Thrones, never even seen an episode, but I'm learning High Valyrian because it's one of the few constructed languages of fantasy. So, like for a show like Game of Thrones, it's one of the few fantasy constructed languages that actually is like complete and has several speakers. So I started learning it. It's very interesting. Like saying Tauba Issa means I'm a boy. Like that's really weird. I don't know of another language that has those kind of roots, but I really like it. So I'll be continuing to learn that. Cantonese, I started learning about a month ago. I started learning it because I needed to learn a Chinese language, but I didn't want to be mainstream and learn Mandarin, so start Cantonese was my best choice. And so I joined a language learning group that I've been a part of it for a while. I've actually tutor on it at the moment. But the language learning group, the one of my close friends on Discord, Water Polyglot, I'm Ether Polyglot, he's Water Polyglot. He spoke Cantonese and Mandarin, so he's teaching Cantonese on there. And so I started learning it with him. His schedule was a little too intensive for me, so I dropped the course, but I'm still learning through some of the resources he gave me. And Cantonese is fun. I know only a few phrases uh like Guangdonghua, which is a word for Cantonese, and uh Nhua Din Jacob means I'm Jacob, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, the next language I started learning was Basque. Um, Basque I started learning with my girlfriend actually because it was a really cool language. My girlfriend speaks Spanish, and Basque is a language spoken in the Basque country of Spain and France. So it was a really interesting language because it had never actually, it wasn't part of any Indo-European language family or any other language family at all. It's a language isolate. So there's no roots. I mean, you might find a few Spanish loan words, but you'll never find any grammar concepts or roots that come from Indo-European languages. So that was really cool. It's also missing 5 letters of the English alphabet, so it's significantly easier to pronounce, which I thought was interesting. The next language is Latvian, which I started not even long ago. I have a video that talks about my study methods I use for Latvian, so I won't talk about that much. But um, I started learning Latvian because one of my friends on Discord, Dakais, he kept pestering me to learn a language that was outside of like common use, and this language, not only is it outside of common use, but also it was the entire language family is outside of common use. And Kais is also learning Latvian, has his own Latvian learning Discord server. If you want a link to it, I can paste it down below. But uh, I started learning it, and my main study method is the same as with Czech, just writing out like a grammar book by Routledge in here. I have like the beginning of it with um, pronunciation and orthography, and in the back I actually wrote like a little phrase book for myself if I wanted to like speak it with somebody, just in case there's somebody I meet that speaks Latvian, because I have no idea if I ever will meet anybody who speaks Latvian. Most recently, I started dabbling in Sanskrit. The only reason I'm learning Sanskrit is because I want to learn the Devanagari script, but Sanskrit's a really interesting language. I'm learning classical and Vedic Sanskrit because I want to be able to read the Vedic texts, even though I don't believe in any of what they say. But anyway, those are the languages that I'm learning so far, and the ones I'm fluent in. So, yeah, peace.